While I respect my colleagues at TechRaptor with the utmost respect, there are of course times that I disagree with them on a fundamental basis. I'm willing to concede points of course, or listen to a counterpoint of view that opposes or is different from mine, but needless to say in the end, there will be situations that based on experiences or different sets of data, I'll come to a different conclusion. But I think those different opinions can lead to great sets of discussions, and possibly evolve the gaming industry as a whole if we understand what the core issues of a topic is, and what has changed in the industry over time. And needless to say, while I respect his opinion, I have to disagree with my colleague Micah Curtis on an issue regarding the industry, as I do believe that the ideas of pre-orders is broken. I may not disagree of certain elements of his article that he wrote, but I want to go into exactly where I see the problems with pre-orders are in today's gaming landscape, and why exactly the practice needs to be looked at with a magnifying glass. Because as he's mentioned, there's more and more reasons nowadays to not pre-order a game, and the damage that the perception of the pre-order has had in the industry lately has painted several publishers as putting the horse before the carriage. You see, there is a lot of truth in what Micah is saying regarding consumerism. The fact is that the market is dictated by the consumers of the market, that money reigns supreme. Now, it's not that simple though, as obviously industry influence in other consumer markets can make unfair circumstances, for example, like monopolies and the like, but when it does come down to it, the consumer dictates what they want, and where companies will succeed and fail. Companies that fail to adapt to consumer practices will go to the wayside, like Kodak for example. But while a variety of factors will go into whether or not a product will sell, a core element always revolves around the product itself. Is it offering a service or experience that no one else has, or better than anyone else has? You can look at the rise of Samsung devices in a market that was once dominated by the iPhone as an example. So for the consumerism point of view, you've got to be willing to pay for it, and more often than not, a better product or service will lead to more consumers of your product or service. Now, with that idea out of the way, let's start with some of the benefits that pre-orders might have once had, or may still have in some form, and whether or not that still applies in today's industry. For the first example, I'm going to take you back to a time long past, in particular, my childhood. When I was in elementary, middle, and high school, pre-orders meant something specifically. It was a guarantee. I remember one fine example regarding GameStop and Chrono Cross. I still put Chrono Trigger in my top 10 games that I've ever played. And the thing was, back in the day, there was no guarantee that you could find a copy of a game on its release date. It was a supply problem, especially with rarer titles. The service that pre-orders provided in that case was simple. It provided a pretty concrete understanding that yes, you'd be able to play day one when the game was released, and you didn't have to run over Timbuktu in order to do it. But for the most part, that's not true with today's distribution system. The idea of digital distribution has fundamentally changed that on a basic level. The fact is the game supply is numerous due to a digital copy being downloadable. And if I have a decent internet connection, I can play the game on the same day it comes out. Now, one can argue that the new benefit instead of the guarantee of the game is preloading. In that case, the pre-order offers a different type of service that it didn't before, and I will concede that as a point. Now, whether or not preloading is enough of a service to offer to the consumer to make them want to pre-purchase is a different story. It is a benefit for sure, so you can play it even earlier than others could possibly. But let's also go beyond that. The whole digital distribution system is one part, but you're able to find a lot of copies, physical copies, of the AAA games on the rack if you go out and look beyond the first shop that you go to. Now, of course, this is region-based, with slower network cables and supplies to shops that don't move much inventory making a difference. However, the overall idea still holds here. Supply is more numerous at this point, but there are certain exceptions to that. When it comes to collector's editions, for example, or rarer games like Atlas RPGs, there can be times when supply is limited. The idea of supply and demand takes hold here. And the pre-order in that case is justified. The fact is, you're paying for a service that in most cases guarantees that you'll get a copy of the game. Not always, but in most cases it will. For a game series that you know you're going to play and buy regardless of the situation, and you want to be one of the first ones in order to actually play the game, then yes, the pre-order makes sense in this situation. You'll be able to play from day one. You see, notice how I highlight that day one portion. and that's if it works. You see, there's been too many examples of day one failures in which the guarantee of being able to play on the launch day just doesn't happen. And people may write this off as being gamers that are impatient, that all users would go through this process and these problems if they pre-ordered or not. But you have to remember the pre-order and what it was offering. The guarantee of the game being available for that player makes a huge difference. People waiting for huge games that they love and have been waiting for a while now will schedule days off from work, fake sick in terms of not going to school, all to play the game that they've been guaranteed to play on the day it comes out. And well, when the one feature that you have isn't available, well, there's a bit of a problem. You've basically lost the service that you've provided at this point in the pre-order. You see, the examples provided in Micah's article are only a couple of the cases in questions, but it's getting more and more frequent over the last several years. It's not just an edge case anymore. Beyond the idea of the failure of Mortal Kombat X's PC launch, and the inability to QA a simple installation process, and the horror that was Assassin's Creed Unity, that image still haunts me to this day despite not playing it. But let's also take a look at some of the other ones. How about when Diablo 3's servers created the infamous Error 37, or the problems regarding the release of World of Warcraft's Warlords of Draenor's queue times, the SimCity debacle, for example. This wasn't necessarily tied to pre-order process in itself, but the fact of the matter remains. One of the reasons you would pre-order would be to play day one and guarantee that game. And if something stops you from doing it, then why pre-order? QA is a whole new problem that I will get into in a future video, because it's an epidemic in the industry lately. But needless to say, the lack of QA lately has given every reason not to pre-order at this point. And carrying on with that idea, one thing that I'm on the same page with Micah on is regarding the pre-order being an inherent risk, and the consumer takes the risk when making a down payment or purchase of a pre-order. And it's an option for which the consumer takes on the possibility of not getting exactly what they paid for, as it's more of an investment more than anything else. But that's the thing. The idea of risk in business is that it's the idea of a sort of gambling, that you may lose on your investment, but you do that in possibly getting a return on that investment as well, something beneficial and worthwhile. Even in the older days, this was still possible, but it's become a lot worse lately due to the rise of networking and the new practice of day one patches and lack of quality control. Let's take a look at it. The fact of the matter is, in the days of the PlayStation 1, Nintendo 64, and the Game Boy, you had one shot to get it right. You don't get a second chance. You don't get to fix it after the fact, because once the code ships, it ships. It's led to some hilarious glitches and problems for some games, even speedruns for some games. But honestly, the quality of those games in terms of the particular AAA market, in my mind, was high, and it didn't have as many bugs in the gameplay as expected now. There were more reasons to invest. The idea of a game being problematic to play in terms of a broken technical experience wasn't as present as it is nowadays. With less reward to invest, there's unnecessary risk. And with more unnecessary risk, there's less reason for the consumer to invest in the game, and therefore not pre-order. You see, that's where I see the major flaw with Micah's argument is. The simple process in question hasn't provided a reasonable service without the introduction of some of the new mechanics in question, because the natural evolution of technology and the growth of the industry as a whole has taken the biggest incentive to pre-order out of the question. Whether or not consumers are taking advantage of it is a different story, and I'll allude to that. So naturally, the industry has attempted to add different incentives to fix the process in terms of the pre-order, and most of them are in-game content. And you see, that's where things get more and more problematic. Mortal Kombat 10 is a prime example of this. Pre-ordering the game got you Goro, the popular boss from the series. The game gave you DLC content, and the question is whether or not this content, which was ready from the start on day one, was broken off to give the incentive for the user to pre-order the game. The problem comes in the fact that the same substance is given in terms of the pre-order. It's not a different service, not a different product. It's not a guarantee, for example, or a guarantee that you'll play day one. It's actually part of the service that you were paying for. It's literally part of the product in question. It's in a segmented form. And so, would that content still exist if the pre-ordering system didn't? That's the big question, and that's why people are a little bit upset. That's where, again, things get dicey. As mentioned, it's not exactly easy to separate the content in terms of what would have been produced regardless of the pre-ordering system and what wouldn't have. Now, this isn't the first industry that has segmented their product. In fact, it's definitely all over several industries at this point. But in terms of guaranteeing the product in question, that's a different story. Now, we've seen pre-orders in other industries. Hey, even lately, we've seen it with Tesla's Powerwall. There's really been no outcry like in the gaming industry over that. But that's because of the services being offered there, and the other items available as reasonable alternatives. Even pre-orders in those other industries don't come through a good amount of the time in terms of the hype. But here's the thing. It's always felt like the risk associated with the gaming industry's portion has been rising in failure to deliver the marketed experience. And when it comes down to something being anti-consumer or not, I get the part of his argument in terms of what the user is paying for. However, there's a catch that I have to point out. The consumer needs to really understand what he is paying for in a reasonable way. The idea is that if marketing and services lends the user to pay for something that they think they want, then the idea holds. But if it's a misrepresentation of what they actually wanted, in particular due to confusion or misleading practices, then that's a different story. And specifically, that's what I have to point out in regards to some of the pre-order editions and exclusives we've seen over the years. And that's easily represented by the debacle that was Watch Dogs' different editions and pre-order content. Just take a quick look at this spreadsheet here. Tell me that between the various different editions that one wouldn't get confused on what they were being offered when attempting to pre-order in a store or virtually. Hell, I'm still trying to figure this out. When the same product is broken up in so many different forms, the end user doesn't know what he's actually getting in most cases. There's a reason why there are laws in place to stop misleading or false advertising, and while Watch Dogs never had a formal accusation thrown at it, many people feel like the amount of options and different cuts of the versions were designed to make the end user want to pick up the most expensive of the versions, mostly because they felt like they were missing something important otherwise. Whether this is anti-consumer or not is the real question here. While one may not specifically be anti-consumer, it plays games with people in order to make them purchase something that they may not want. There's also things like practices, such as naming like with the hunting season pass from Evolve, which wasn't actually a season pass as we know it today. Yes, the consumer rules in terms of payment, but that's if he really has a true understanding of what he's getting, and frankly, that's been towing the line lately to the point where I wonder if somebody would challenge it in the court of law. Hell, technically it has already happened. Killzone Shadowfall with the whole 1080p situation, which was sadly thrown out despite the admitting of the fact that it was truly not 1080p. And even with Watch Dogs, there was still the problem of exclusive pre-order content. If you pre-ordered at Walmart, you got the Cyberpunk theme pack. If you pre-ordered at Best Buy, you got the Breakthrough pack. At Target, the Bloom Agent pack. And these weren't just skins in several cases. These were in-game perks included in a couple of them that actually affected gameplay. So where you shop made a difference at that point. All for content that was seemingly ready and was available for the user to purchase after the fact. The consumer in this case feels manipulated, and frankly, I can easily see why. You see, that's where I think a lot of people have problems with the consumer practices that are happening in terms of game developers and publishers lately. The fact of the matter is, if the cards were all laid out on the table, I think the people would have less problems with it. But the problem is that we're not playing a game of 52 card pickup. We're playing a game of 3 card Monty. We may have seen the card at first, but it's rearranged in such different ways that we don't know exactly where the card is actually gone. And unfortunately, with every 3 card Monty situation, you wonder if the people who are making the game are being honest with you. And that's the problem. But you probably noted the word evolution in the title of this video, and are wondering, what do I mean by that? Well, just like the idea of Darwinism, the idea here is simple. Pre-orders in my mind have to either evolve in several significant ways to offer the consumer a reasonable service that is actually worth the risk they are undertaking in some way, or it's going to fall through the wayside rather quickly. The thing is, consumers are getting smarter with their video games, as too many instances of being burned with early access, Kickstarter, and pre-orders have them realizing that a statement, an idea, a trailer behind a game doesn't give you the whole story. There are still reasons to pre-order in this current time in certain cases, as I mentioned before, but the laundry list of reasons not to, well, they overshadow them immensely. But if the pre-order industry is still majorly important to publishers, and the industry and the gaming press and companies say they are, then what's the solution here? Well, let's think about exactly what could be offered in the modern day environment that may be a reasonable idea of where the video game community has come and where the video game industry is heading. Again, I'm making an assumption here that the pre-order industry is still important to the industry here, as I have no data to necessarily directly deny that claim. So this is a thought experiment of what can be done on the publisher and developer side to give consumers a reason to start pre-ordering again. Now to begin with, even with what I'm saying regarding the past is mostly true, there's still the element of physical rewards that are always appealing to people, or things related to the game in some way that isn't part of the overall game experience. As I said before, no segmentation. Now, a lot of these physical rewards ones are being offered as limited editions or collector's editions, but I'm not even necessarily talking a huge statue that you have to include like you saw with Skyrim, for example. In the older days, a physical copy of a soundtrack, for example, or even a player's guide would be included if you pre-ordered the game, and that was a good benefit. Now, a player's guide makes no sense in today's world, but getting a copy of a game's soundtrack as a pre-order bonus in physical or digital form is a fine example of what to offer. While you still get the content within the gameplay in question, you get something that should be a minimal cost to produce, while still giving the end user an actual reasonable return. Sure, that's not going to be an incentive that's going to appeal for everyone, but it's an example of something of worthwhile return, something that gives the user a reason to actually purchase the game and take the inherent risk factor associated with it. It's got to be something of substance. Even a really nice poster, depending on its quality and art quality, can be a good idea to bundle, or some unique trinket that really stands out that will draw people's eyes, but that alone may not do it. One thing that publishers and developers could really take advantage of is the evolution of social media and interactivity with its fans. In particular, one thing that I liked from a recent game that came out of early access shows the ideas on where the pre-order industry could evolve. JumpJet Rex had Twitch streams in which people could see their progress on the game, see them designing, or even talk to the developers in question. And in today's social media driven and connective world, that's a great example of what could be offered in pre-orders. Set a stream, chats, or interactions with developers or key personnel. People more than ever love seeing the people behind the games in question, and the idea of offering those interactions between them and the community could be a key part. There's a lot of benefits there. Those getting the game development may get to see design elements, while those fans may have influence on how a game evolves. There's similarities with early access here, and while early access has a stigma about it at this point, the idea behind some of it can help not only the consumer, but the producer as well. Now note, this does have issues. The fact is, once you start being able to watch Twitch streams would seem to make it so that you couldn't cancel the pre-order, which you really can't do. And there's no guarantee the information wouldn't get out to the real world and press. But that's the thing, that's the interactivity part. It's great to watch after the fact, of course, but being able to ask questions of key team members and what they have to offer is something that more people want to know about the game. It's an idea that should be investigated and taken into account, as while there are obviously a time cost to it, for personnel, it may be worth it in the end. But with all this talk of evolution, I want to make something clear. Nothing is currently going to fix the state of pre-ordering if the industry's lack of QA focus and early shipping doesn't stop right now. Again, I always look at Nintendo for the standard that should be set. A game should not come out until it's pretty much been looked over up and down, left and right, and with a fine-tuned comb. There's too much risk involved in it. There's been too many cases of games that just plain sucked over the last several years or been released in a broken state. Until that epidemic is taken care of, the pre-order issue isn't going away. But beyond that, the pre-order is looking to be on its last legs. Even within the consumer not exactly being the most educated person at times. Just take a look at the numbers. 12% less pre-orders in Europe is a great example of people becoming smarter in terms of investing in a game. That's not a trend that's going away soon, unless the industry realizes what it's doing to itself, as Micah said.